The rain had been falling since dawn, and the gray sky hung low over the city like wet stone when Amelia Brooks pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Family Services Center, her coat dripping on the cracked linoleum floor, her hair clinging to her face in damp strands. She held the folder so tightly her knuckles were white. Inside the folder were the papers, the last pieces of her life as she had known it, the papers that would end her fight, the papers that would take Oliver and Emma from her forever. She moved through the hallway with slow steps, as if each one cut something loose from inside her. The air smelled of paper and coffee and something faintly sour like hopelessness. She could hear children laughing faintly from a playroom down the hall. The sound felt like glass against her skin. She remembered when Oliver used to laugh like that, full and bright like sunlight before the fire, before everything turned to ash. They had been happy once she and Daniel and their twins, the small bookstore. He smelled of paper and cinnamon. He would come home each night with ink on his fingers and a smile on his face, and the twins would run into his arms. Amelia had believed that was forever until the night the fire took him, and the shop, and everything they had built. She remembered the screaming, the smoke, the way the world turned black and silent. She had stood outside, holding her babies, while the flames devoured her life. Since then, it had been a slow, drowning bills, piling up notices, filling the mailbox, food growing thinner each week. She had tried to work. She had tried everything, part-time, jobs, night shifts, cleaning offices when the twins slept. She had walked home through the dark streets, holding her shoes because her feet hurt too much to wear them anymore. She had watched her children shrink into quiet shadows while she tried to hold the world together with her bare hands until she could not anymore. She reached the office door, now the one with the gold letters that said Family Placement. Division, her fingers trembled on the handle. She whispered to herself, "Just do it, they deserve better than this. They deserve a chance and not this broken life." Her voice cracked, but she pushed the door open. Inside, the office was warm, too. Warm and bright, the caseworker sat behind a desk stacked with forms. Her face soft with practiced pity, she said, "Are you ready, Amelia?" Her voice was gentle, like she was asking about the weather. Amelia nodded, though her throat burned. She sat and opened the folder, her hand shaking so hard the papers rattled. She thought of Oliver's small hand in hers as they walked to school that morning, how he had asked if she would be there when he got home. She thought of Emma braiding her hair and saying, "Mama, you are the strongest girl in the world." Her vision blurred. She reached for the pen. The door slammed open. A tall man in a dark coat stepped inside with rain dripping from his shoulders. His presence hit the room like a shock of cold air. His eyes swept the scene, the desk, the papers, the trembling woman, and he said in a voice like, "Stone, stop." The caseworker blinked, startled. "Sir, you cannot be here," he said. "I can, and I will." He walked forward and took the papers from Amelia's hands. She froze, unable to breathe. He scanned them once, then set them back on the desk and turned to her, his eyes sharp and bright. "Who told you they would be better off without you?" She could not answer, her voice locked in her chest. He said, "I know who you are, Amelia Brooks. I know what happened to your husband. I know how you worked 3 jobs and still kept them fed. I know you have nothing left and still came here to give them something better. That is what everyone thinks, but they are wrong. They do not need better. They need you." Her lips parted soundless. "How do you know who I am?" "Because I make it my business to know what this city forgets," he said. "My name is Nathan Cole." The name hit her like thunder. She had seen it on billboards and business journals. The youngest tech magnate in the country, worth more than she could imagine. People called him ruthless, untouchable, a man carved from glass. She said, I do not understand. Why are you here? Because someone told me 2 children were about to be lost to a system that would crush them, and that their mother was about to sign them away. I came to stop that. Her tears spilled hot and silent. I cannot feed them. Then I will, he said. She stared at him like he was not real. He continued, I will give you a home, not charity, a contract, a year of housing, a salary, a job at my company with training and childcare included. You will rebuild, and when you can stand on your own, you will, and if you fail, I will try again until you do not fail. Why? She whispered. Because someone once did it for me, he said. The caseworker sputtered. This is highly irregular. Nathan said, I do not care. Draw up the agreement, or I will buy this building and do it myself. Silence fell heavy. Amelia's heart pounded her hands, trembling over her lap. She looked at the papers and then at him, and for the first time in years, she felt something break inside the dark, not from despair, but from light. She whispered, I do not know if I can do this. Nathan said, you can, and you will. And if you fall, I will not let you stay down. She closed her eyes and nodded once. Hey, she said. The city looked different the next morning, like someone had wiped the sky clean and laid a thin strip of blue above the rooftops. Amelia stood on the curb with Oliver and Emma clutching their backpacks while a black car eased to the sidewalk. The driver stepped out with a quiet nod and opened the door, his voice gentle. Miss Brooks, we will go whenever you are ready. Amelia breathed in slow, her chest tight with disbelief and fear. In a thin, bright ribbon of hope, she helped the twins into the back seat, then slid in beside them. The car smelled of leather and rain. The driver asked for an address, and when she faltered, he said, Mr. Cole asked me to bring you first to your apartment, then to the office. She nodded and folded her fingers together to stop the shaking. The car crossed the river and pulled into a quiet block lined with maple trees, their branches bare and delicate. A new building rose from the corner, all pale brick and wide windows. Sunlight pooled on the steps. The driver carried their small duffel and led them to an elevator that hummed softly, then opened on a hallway lined with warm lights and a door marked with her name. Even seeing it written there felt like a trick of the light. Inside, the apartment was simple and bright. A small kitchen with clean counters, a living room with a couch that did not sag, 2 bedrooms with real beds and warm quilts, a closet full of towels and soap and tiny toothbrushes in paper sleeves. Oliver ran to the window and pressed his hands to the glass. Mama, look, we can see the river. Emma spun slow in the middle of the room, as if testing whether the floor would hold, and then fell into giggles on the rug. Amelia stood still and let the quiet wash over her, the kind of quiet that did not come from emptiness, but from safety. On the table lay an envelope. She opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a key card, a transit pass, a folder labeled onboarding, and a short note handwritten in a spare, steady hand. Welcome home, start with breakfast. There is time. Then come to the tower at 10. Bring nothing but yourselves. She cooked oatmeal on a clean stove and sliced an apple and watched her children eat without counting the pieces in her head. When they finished, she braided Emma's hair, tied Oliver's shoes, and stood with them in the doorway for a long breath before locking a door that finally belonged to them. The black car waited again and carried them through mid-morning light to the steel and glass spine of the tower. The lobby rose like a cathedral of sky. Sunlight spilled through shifting panes and painted the marble in quiet gold. A woman in a gray suit waited near the desk. She wore no smile, but her eyes were kind. Miss Brooks, I am Mina, head of people operations. Welcome and welcome. Oliver and Emma, she knelt to the twins and pointed through a glass wall. Beyond it, a room glowed with color and soft carpets. Children read and painted, while 2 teachers moved like calm water. Mina said, This is our children's center. It is here every weekday, and on late project nights, we keep it open as long as parents need. Amelia felt something loosen in her throat. The teacher with curly hair approached and crouched to the twins' level. She told them her name and asked theirs, and in 2 minutes, Oliver and Emma were building a tower from bright blocks. The teacher looked up at Amelia and said, "You can check in any time, and we will call you if either of them needs a hug." Amelia nodded, her voice gone for a moment, then turned as Mina guided her toward the elevator. They rose to a floor of open light and quiet hum, where glass offices floated like lanterns. Mina led Amelia to a small room with a table, a laptop, a packet of forms, and a steaming paper cup of the kind of coffee that used to cost a full hour of her wages. Mina said, "We will do this 1 page at a time, and you can ask anything at all. No one expects you to know our language yet." They worked through the morning, gentle and steady payroll, health coverage, training schedules. A mentor named Talia assigned to Amelia for her first 90 days a list of classes on data and brand storytelling, with paid time to attend, and a badge that opened the doors without a guard frown or a second glance. Each time a line asked for a number or a signature, Mina waited without hurry and never sighed the way caseworkers had the week before. Just before noon, a shadow spilled across the doorway, and Nathan stepped in without ceremony in a dark suit that caught the light like water. The room seemed to adjust around him. Amelia rose too fast and knocked her knee against the chair, he noticed, and his voice softened but did not bend. "How are Oliver and Emma?" Amelia said they found the blocks. His mouth eased a fraction. "Good, and you?" she answered. "I am still learning to breathe," and saw something like recognition move behind his eyes. "Then you are exactly where you are supposed to be." He scanned the forms with a quick eye, said to Mina, "Make sure she has the training allocation front-loaded," then turned to Amelia. "We will walk." He did not wait for agreement, only stepped into the corridor, and she followed. The building opened around them into quiet terraces of work tables and walls of shifting glass. He pointed out where teams gathered, where decisions were made, where food and silence and light could be found. He showed her a side stair for when elevators felt too crowded, a bench by a high window for days when the world needed to be held at a distance. They paused at a balcony where the city unrolled like a map far below, and he said without looking at her, "I am not giving you a favor. I am buying time, your time, and theirs. Do not waste it." She held the rail until her fingers steadied. "Time," she whispered to herself like a promise. After lunch, she met Talia, a woman with bright eyes and sleeves rolled to her elbows, who said, "I know what it is to start over and mean it. Now let us build your first week together." Talia set goals like stepping stones, not cliffs, small projects to map the brand story of a pilot product, a meeting to shadow in the afternoon, a brief to write by Friday, and 2 hours blocked each day for training. "No one touches those hours," she said. "They are yours to keep." Amelia took notes fast and tidy, then walked downstairs to check on Oliver and Emma. The teacher waved from a circle of cushions. Oliver lifted a paper rocket high. Emma held up a sun made of yellow triangles. Both children grinned, the kind of grin that starts in the eyes. Amelia put a hand to the glass and closed it in a quiet thank you that the teacher answered with a nod. In the afternoon, Amelia stepped into a small conference room to shadow her first meeting. 4 people, and Talia at the head, a product manager explaining a launch date that had slipped twice, a designer tracing shapes in the air as if moving thoughts from one state to another. Talia turned to Amelia and said, "Only listen for the story, not the jargon. Find the thread that a parent on a bus could understand and care about." Amelia listened to the drift and tug of voices, caught a line about distance, and brought it back gently. "So you were telling people they can be there without moving," and the room stilled, then tilted toward her, as if a compass had found north. Talia tapped a pen twice, like a small bell. Exactly, she said, and kept going. By 4, the muscles in Amelia's back began to shake with a kind of exhausted relief she had not felt in years. She checked the time and hurried to the children's center, where a basket of oranges sat near the door. Emma had paint on her fingers. Oliver had a book tucked under his arm. Amelia knelt and heard a rush of words about a girl who built a city from cardboard and a boy who could hear the river talking to the moon. She kissed both foreheads, and a teacher pressed 2 small paper stars into her hand for later wishes. They took the elevator to the lobby, the light warmer. Now the building full of that late day hum. Amelia was about to leave when the doors opened again, and Nathan stepped out with 2 executives trailing. He saw her and stopped. The others kept moving with tight nods. He held her eyes for a second, then said to the air that gathered around them, "Do you have what you need?" And when Amelia said, "I do, thank you," he answered, "Good, tell Mina if you do not." And then he was past her, the air closing behind him like a book. On the sidewalk, dusk folded over the city. The maple trees along the block clicked their bare twigs together. Oliver asked if the elevator lived in the sky. Amelia laughed and said, "Maybe a little." Emma asked if tomorrow would be the same. Amelia squeezed her hand and said tomorrow will be ours to keep, and felt the words lodge like anchors. That night, they unpacked clothes into drawers that smelled of cedar and soap. Oliver lined his paper rockets on the windowsill. Emma tucked her son under her pillow. Amelia found 2 lamps and turned them on low, so the rooms glowed like safe harbors. She cooked rice and eggs and cut the last apple into careful slices, and when they finished, the twins brushed their teeth at the same sink without crowding anyone, and fell asleep in beds that did not creak. Alone in the living room, Amelia opened the onboarding folder again. Her name looked strange under the letterhead, like it belonged to someone braver. She read the schedule for the week, checked the child care hours, ran a fingertip down the column of training classes, and stopped at one named Stories that carry in rooms of noise. She whispered the title and felt her lungs rise fully for the first time in months. Her phone buzzed a message from an unknown number, the words spare and quiet, as always. "Tomorrow there will be noise. Do not let it eat." The work, she knew it was Nathan without seeing the name she typed. "Thank you," then erased it, then typed, "Understood," then set the phone face down and sat a long time with her hands folded and the lights low, listening to the warm, small breathing of her children through the wall. Morning came with a pale stripe of light across the floor. Amelia woke before the twins and stood by the window while the city stretched itself awake. She made oatmeal again, tucked 2 oranges into a bag, and walked Oliver and Emma to the center, where they ran to the book corner without looking back. Her chest ached from that tiny pain that is really joy. Then she climbed to the training floor and took a seat in the second row of a small glass classroom, where a woman with silver hair spoke about message gravity and attention loss and the power of one true sentence. Amelia wrote fast and steady. And when the instructor asked for a volunteer to share a line, Amelia heard her own voice before she decided to speak. "Here is what we do. We give people back a minute that they thought was lost." The instructor smiled small and real and said, "Keep that and build around it like a spine." By midday, she had drafted a brief and carried it to Talia, who marked it with a pencil and said, "You have a voice. Now let us help you aim it." Talia then did the thing that good leaders do. She disappeared and let Amelia own the room. Amelia stepped into her first real stand-up and spoke in a clear, even tone about the shape of the campaign and the small goals for the week and the one brave thing they would try on Thursday, and no one laughed, and no one looked bored. which in itself felt like a miracle. At 3, a ripple of cold ran through the office. Afterward, people drifted toward the atrium. Screens flickered with a news banner, and in a moment, the past reached for her. A headline about the fire in the shop. From months ago, a follow-up story about unpaid debt, and a photograph of her carrying 2 children through a doorway bright with smoke. The kind of picture that turns a person into a symbol. The text below full of guesses and wrong numbers. Amelia felt the old shame rise hot and choking, and then she heard a footstep behind her, and Talia said softly, "Stand with me for a minute," and they did. 2 women in a sea of noise, not running, just breathing, until the current passed. A few minutes later, her phone vibrated. Mina Floor, 9 Quiet Room. Now Amelia went up and found Mina with a calm-faced man from communications who spoke in a voice like a blanket. "We saw the story, it will pass. Do not engage. We will handle requests. You keep your head in the work." Amelia nodded, and the man added also, "There is tea in the drawer behind you. Small things help." When she left the room, the air felt clear again. She went straight to the children's center, where Oliver was building a bridge, and Emma was teaching a stuffed rabbit to read they were perfect and loud and whole. And the photo on the screen was only a picture, not a prophecy. She bent to them and said, "We are going to get noodles tonight, because we can, and because it is Tuesday," and they cheered as if Tuesday had always been a holiday. They ate at a small shop under a blue awning, the steam from the bowls fogging the window. Oliver told a very serious story about a robot who learned to make pancakes. Emma explained that the sun under her pillow made her sleep heavier, and Amelia listened and laughed and wiped broth from chins and felt the world land in its right place for a few quiet minutes. On the walk home, her phone buzzed again, a short line from Nathan. "Good work on the brief. Deliver it to me at 8 in the morning. Bring the line about lost minutes," Amelia texted back. "Understood," and this time, she did not erase it. Back in the apartment, she tucked the twins into bed and sat at the table with her laptop and the paper stars and the tea. Mina had recommended the room hummed with the soft electricity of ordinary life. She revised the brief without mercy, until the words were swift and clear. She read it aloud in a low voice that did not wake the children. Then she placed 1 paper star on Oliver's windowsill and 1 beside Emma's pillow, and kept none for herself because the wish she wanted had already started to happen. Near midnight, she stood at the window and looked at the tower, at the slice of sky, at the quiet street, and she said in a voice almost soundless, "I will not waste the time you gave us," and she felt the city answer like a distant tide, steady and sure and moving toward morning. By the 2nd month, the rhythm of her days had shifted into something like music. She rose before the twins, the city still hushed under a blue-gray sky. She brewed coffee in the quiet kitchen, braided Emma's hair, while she mumbled sleepy jokes, tied Oliver's shoes. While he recited facts about planets, they walked together to the tower, where the glass caught the morning light like fire. The twins ran toward the children's center without looking back, and Amelia climbed to her floor with the calm focus of someone who had learned to belong. Her team began trusting her voice in meetings. They no longer glanced at Talia before answering her ideas. They simply answered her. She began leading small projects, then larger ones, threading stories into campaigns that caught attention, and held it her brief about lost minutes had gone viral. Within the company, people repeated the line like a mantra, and Nathan had said nothing about it in public. But one morning she passed a glass wall and saw it written on the board behind his desk. Her breath had caught, and she had kept walking. The media had quieted for a while, until the storm began again, this time not about the fire or her past debts, but about her present. A columnist had called her a pet project of a powerful man. Said she was proof that success could be bought. If you caught the right eye, the article spread like frost across the city screens. Colleagues whispered when they thought she could not hear. The air thickened with something colder than doubt. It was envy laced with cruelty. That afternoon, Talia found her standing at the edge of the atrium, staring at nothing. She said, "They will tire of this, like they tire of everything." Amelia said, "It feels like they want me to disappear." Talia said they do, but only because they cannot ignore you, and she handed Amelia a small folded paper from her desk drawer. It said, in Talia's fast, neat writing, "People will always say you were given what they could not take." Amelia kept it in her notebook, like a shield. The next day, Nathan appeared in the doorway of her office without sound. He said, "Come with me," and turned. She followed him down a quiet back stair and out into the raw air of the loading dock, where the smell of steel and rain wrapped around them. He leaned against the wall, his voice lower than usual. "They are circling you because they see what you are becoming. Do not let them tell your story for you," she said. "I do not know how to stop them," he said. You drown them in results, and then you walk past their noise until it burns out." She asked, "Why do you care?" And he said, "Because I have watched them build people just to break them, and I am tired of the wreckage." They stood in silence for a while, the city humming faint around them, and when they returned to the tower, something had shifted, not in how he treated her, but in how he looked at her, like he was measuring her against something vast and hidden and finding her equal. She began working later, staying after the lights dimmed, walking the silent halls while cleaning crews whispered through the glass. Nathan often worked those hours too, their paths crossing like tide. Sometimes they spoke of projects, sometimes they sat in the same quiet room without words while the city bled its neon glow across the floor. One night, near midnight, she found him alone on the balcony, his jacket off his sleeves, rolled, his hands braced on the railing. The wind tore at his hair. He looked less like the man from the news and more like something raw and human. He said without looking at her, "My sister used to stand like this when she thought no one was watching." Amelia said, "I did not know you had a sister." He said, "I do not anymore." She waited. He said, "She was younger, brilliant, sharper than me. She burned through every room she entered, then the fire inside her turned, and she disappeared before I could pull her back. They said it was her choice, but I think it was the silence that took her, the silence after they stopped believing she could win." Amelia said, "I am sorry," and meant it, like a stone placed gently on the ground. He said, "You remind me of her, not in how you work, but in how you refuse to vanish. I will not let them make you disappear." She said, "I will not disappear." And something like relief flickered through his face, like a match struck in the wind. After that night, he began inviting her into higher rooms, strategy sessions where the board watched her, like they were deciding if she was real. She kept her tone, even her posture steady. She brought data like arrows and stories like maps. She did not flinch when they tested her. One afternoon, Hale's old allies tried to corner her in a meeting, throwing figures and accusations until her pulse thundered, but she caught their trap midair and cut it in half with one calm question. Nathan said nothing, only watched her, and when the meeting ended, his mouth curved the faintest fraction as he left. The twins were thriving. Oliver had joined a coding club. Emma painted cityscapes full of birds. Their drawings filled the walls of the apartment like small flags of victory. Some nights Amelia lay awake, listening to their breathing, and wondering if this life was real, if she would wake to the ashes again. But morning always came, and they always ran laughing down the hall to the elevator, and she followed with her badge clipped to her collar, like proof that she belonged. Then came the night of the investor summit. The building transformed into a cathedral of glass and shadow lights strung like stars along the balcony. Amelia had been tasked with opening the presentation, her story meant to anchor the launch of a global campaign. She paced backstage in her black suit, her palms damp. The crowd a murmur of money and judgment beyond the curtain. Nathan appeared beside her with a glass of water and said, "They are only people. Remember that she said they could destroy me." He said, "Only if you forget who you are." She walked on stage and the room fell still. She told them about lost minutes, about building time, not just selling devices. Her voice steadied her heart like thunder. When she finished, the silence cracked into applause, sharp and clean. Nathan stood at the back of the hall, his hands in his pockets, his eyes locked on hers like a promise. Afterward, reporters crowded the floor, questions flashing like knives. Amelia slipped out a side door and found herself alone on the service balcony, the night air cold and sharp. Nathan was already there, leaning on the railing, watching the river light. He said, "You were extraordinary." She said, "I was terrified." He said, "Good fear sharpens the blade." They stood close, the hum of the city rising from far below the wind, lifting her hair. She felt the heat of him beside her, not touching, not speaking, and for a moment the noise of the world faded until there was only the sound of their breathing. Later, when she returned to the apartment, the twins were asleep. Oliver, clutching his paper rocket. Emma curled around her son. She watched them for a long time and whispered, "I will not fail you." She woke before dawn and found a message on her phone from Nathan. Just 4 words. "The noise is fading." The morning the floor gave way began like any other with soft gray light, and the city stretching itself awake under the tower. Amelia packed 2 small lunches with steady hands, poured oatmeal into 3 bowls, and braided Emma's hair. While Oliver practiced the names of the planets, she kissed both foreheads and walked them to the children's center, where the door staff smiled and the room glowed warm with books and bright blocks. She stood for a heartbeat, watching their shoulders relax the way children do when they feel safe. Then she rode the elevator up with her badge warm against her collar and a list of goals arranged in her head like stepping stones across a river. By 9, the river turned to ice. The first message slid across her screen with a chill that felt like winter under the skin. A link to a story from a site that lived on rumor and noise. It carried photos pulled from years of struggle. The shop fire, the apartment building where she had borrowed sleep between shifts, and then a new photo shot from across the street, her and Nathan exiting the tower together. The text under it heavy with poison. The single mother who caught a king. It said it claimed she had been paid to be a symbol. It claimed her children were a prop. It claimed her job was theater, written by a man who had never wiped tears from a kitchen floor at midnight. Her throat closed, but her work tray kept lighting with small fires. So she put the story in a box inside her mind and answered messages one by one until the box began to shake at the seam. Then Mina stepped into her doorway with a face like still water and said, "We need to talk. Floor 9. Quiet room now." Amelia followed with her spine straight and her hands cold. The room, Mina, a calm man from communications and a lawyer whose voice sounded like a blanket left warming on a chair. The comms lead said, "This is what we know so far. The story is climbing quickly. A rival fund is amplifying it. The intent is to make your work look like a bargain struck behind closed doors," the lawyer added. "We have procedures to protect you and the children. We will not feed the fire. You focus on what only you can do. We will handle the rest." Mina poured tea and slid it across the table, small and steady, and said, "Remember to breathe." Amelia returned to her floor with her breath measured. She sat and opened her brief, and worked line by line, her mind trying to ignore the way the air seemed to vibrate. Then Talia appeared at the doorway and leaned her shoulder against the frame, her eyes bright but her voice low. Do not take their language into your mouth today. Do the work that proves them wrong, and I will walk every step beside you. Amelia nodded, and something inside unclenched for a moment. At noon, the storm changed shape. The same site posted a second piece with a headline that read, "We found the adoption papers." The words punched the air from her lungs. They had taken a photo of her hand upon the folder at the Family Services Center months ago. They had circled the word adoption like a wound. They did not explain the ache. They did not explain the rain or the way a heart splits to save its children. They only shouted, and the city listened because shouting is easy. Her phone rang with an unknown number. She did not answer. Then the desk line flashed, and Mina said softly, "Do not pick up any private calls from numbers you do not know. We have shielded the child care floor. No one gets in without clearance." The word shielded and child care bent the room, the way wind bends a tree, and Amelia stood quickly and crossed to the glass wall that looked down toward the children's center. She could not see them from here, but she pressed her palm to the glass anyway and counted to 10 until the tremor in her hands faded. Half an hour later, 3 directors asked for an emergency session, and she walked into a glass room where the table shone like ice. A pair of directors sat stiff and cold, one of them a man who had been friendly last week, now speaking in careful clipped phrases about perceptions and risk and reputational drag. He said the media points to impropriety. The rival fund is calling for a review. It may be safer if you step back from public responsibilities until we complete our assessment. Amelia kept her voice even and said, "My work speaks for itself," the man said. "Perhaps, but the noise speaks louder." And then the door opened and Nathan stepped in. Without announcement, his presence changed the pressure in the room. Like weather, he looked at no one for a breath, then set a folder on the table and said, "The only assessment happening today is of your memory of what this company is supposed to be." The directors shifted in their seat. He spoke evenly, not loud, not sharp, but with a calm that cuts. "Our values are not decorative." He said, "We do not invite people to build with us and then abandon them when the city shouts. We do not ask a single mother to strap a company to her back and then call her a liability when competitors turn up the volume." One director began to object, but Nathan did not let the words find air. He said the children are safe. The story is a lie layered on truth, and I will not allow us to become the kind of room that mistakes volume for fact. If anyone here wishes to vote on silencing the person who saved this company, they may place their resignation on my desk beside their ballot. The room went very still like glass at midnight. Then the cold director cleared his throat and said, "We will reconvene at the standard time," and left with the others, like a tide withdrawing from rocks when the doctor clicked shut. Nathan looked at Amelia for the first time, and the steel in his face softened half a degree. He said, "Are you steady?" And she nodded once, though the floor rippled beneath her, and he said, "I am moving a press briefing to 5. You will not attend." "I will." He paused, then added, "The children will remain on 9 until you come to collect them. And I have increased security levels today," she wanted to say. "Do not spend your weight on me." And she wanted to say, "I can stand." And she wanted to say, "Thank you." But she only said, "Understood." And he gave one small nod and left. At 4, the tower felt like a chest that has forgotten how to breathe. Mina walked Amelia to a small room with a couch and a low lamp and said, "Sit for 10 minutes before the next thing begins." Amelia sat and did not close her eyes because behind her eyes a flood was waiting. She stared at the seam in the wall and counted her breaths and thought of Oliver arranging his paper rockets on and Emma tucking a son under her pillow, and the sound their feet made when they ran down the hallway of the apartment, small thunder that meant home. 5 o'clock arrived like a held note, breaking the lobby, swelled with cameras and questions. The world had come to drink drama from inside the glass. Nathan took the podium in a suit the color of weather, and looked like a man who had carved himself from the same stone as the. He did not begin with numbers. He began with a line: every person in this tower earned their place, and we will not sell their names for your clip, he said, his voice calm and exact. A campaign to discredit our work has chosen to focus on one of our leaders because it believes the public will punish a woman who refused to fail. I built this company to outlast such campaigns, and we will. The room pressed forward with questions, but he did not let them steer the shape of the story. He explained what the rumor machine had bent. Adoption paperwork referenced out of time, the context erased. He told them the children were safe. He told them the company stood with its people. He said, we do not abandon our own, and in that simple sentence, there was a door that would not be moved. Upstairs, Amelia watched the stream with the sound low. Mina beside her with a pen that never touched paper, and Talia on her other side, breathing measured like a metronome. When Nathan finished, the room on the screen burst with shouted questions, but the feed cut because the room belonged to the company, not the crowd and the silence. After that cut felt like rain finally falling on a field after a long summer of smoke. Then the next strike came not from a screen, but from the past. A social worker from a city office reached out to the corporate legal line with a request for a wellness check. An old flag in a system had been pulled by someone working late, the word investigation written like a bruise. Mina kept her face steady and said, this is procedure, not punishment. We will meet it with truth. The lawyer returned with a plan, a review at the apartment that evening, a home visit to confirm ordinary safety, a fridge with food, a place for sleep, a list of caregiving hours. It would be routine. She said it will be fine and meant it, and still the fear arrived with teeth and sat down in Amelia's space. She went to the children's center and gathered Oliver and Emma, their arms full of paper birds and a bridge made of steel. The teacher knelt and said, call if you need anything. We have a nightline that rings to me directly. Amelia nodded and carried her family out into the dusk together. The sky laced with orange and the apartment met them with its soft lamps and its quiet rugs and its towels folded like kind. She set the twins at the table with noodles and apple slices, then straightened the bookshelf and checked the cupboards and placed the tea on the counter. The small, gentle choreography of a knock sounded, and a woman stood at the door with a badge and a calm face and shoes that had seen long days. She introduced herself and said, this will be quick, I promise, and her voice was not a knife. It was a spoon. She looked at the beds. She looked at the fridge. She spoke softly with Oliver about the rockets and with Emma about the. She glanced at the report that still lived in some old file on some old desk, and she held the weight of it like a careful person holds glass. Then she said, I am closing this now. You are doing fine, and if anyone tells you otherwise, send them to me. Amelia felt her knees want to give, but she stayed standing until the door clicked closed, then leaned her forehead to the wood and let a breath leave her that could have been a decade long. Her phone buzzed a single line from Nick. The check is closed. Rest now. She typed a reply and erased it twice, and then wrote, we are home, and left it at that. She put the twins to bed with extra blankets because comfort can be gathered like leaves in a basket, and sat at the small table in the quiet living room with the low lamp and the tea that had cooled, and opened her laptop. She revised the launch plan for the morning. She wrote a new opener that did not explain herself to anyone. She adjusted timelines and wrote a note to her team that said, "This is the route, this is the weather, we will walk anyway." Near midnight, a knock came again, softer this time. She opened the door to find Talia holding a bag of oranges and a grin that looked like a small lighthouse. She said, "I am fine." Amelia said, "You are lying," and handed her an orange. They sat on the couch eating in silence, the way tired women do when there is nothing left to say that will make a... Then Talia stood and said, "See you at 8. We will make them forget their own noise," and left with the smell of citrus hanging in the hall like a kind spirit. Morning came with clean light. Amelia woke to Oliver reading softly to Emma, a book about a bird that was afraid of storms. She rose and made oatmeal and packed 2 lunches and walked the twins down to the center where the teachers waved, and the room bloomed with voices that sounded like... She rode the elevator up to the floor that held her desk and her notes and her clean white wall, and when she sat, the fear that had camped in her bones the day before was gone. Not because it had been defeated, but because work needed to be done, and work is a rope you can hold when the path narrows. Mina came by with 2 short updates. The site had moved on to a new fire to stare at, and the investor who had amplified the rumor had been very politely reminded of a clause that made their theatrics expensive. As for the city office, the file had been closed with a note that might as well have been a small flag reading "safe and ordinary." Amelia nodded her thanks and bent to her. Talia arrived with a stack of sticky notes and a plan, and together they moved pieces on the table like chess played by people who prefer mercy to conquer. Just before noon, Nathan sent a message, "Meet me at the balcony," and she went. The wind out there smelled like weather. He stood with his hands at the rail and the city lifting toward them. He said, "The noise will come back someday. It always does." She said, "I know," he said. "When it does, we will be ready." And she believed him, because last night he had put himself between her and a machine that eats names for current, not with a flourish, but with a sentence, and the promise that followed it, "We do not abandon our own." She looked out across the river at the thin silver seam where water met sky and said, "I almost disappeared." He said, "I would not have let you." She said, "You are only one person." He said, "That has never stopped me before," and a small, crooked smile found his mouth for the first time since the morning had broken under their feet. They stood like that without speaking while the wind folded itself around them. And when she went back inside to the meetings and the whiteboards and the lunch eaten standing, she felt the world settle into a shape that could be carried and not just endured by late afternoon. The team cracked the hard piece of the launch. The line of the story clicked into place like a key finding its home, and people laughed the kind of laugh that comes from not mockery. She printed the timeline and taped it to the glass where the low sun could warm the ink, and thought of the first day in this building when she had moved like a now she moved like part of its bone. At 5, she walked down to collect the twins. Emma ran to her with paint on her finger. Oliver with a new word for a constellation. They rode the elevator with their shoulders pressed together and stepped into the early evening where the air felt rich. She cooked rice and carrots and eggs, and they all sat on the rug to eat. While the lamps made little islands of light, the world had tried to swallow them and failed. The world would try again and would fail again, because there are some rooms you do not leave once you learn how to stand in them. When the twins were asleep, Amelia opened her notebook and wrote a single line, "We will not be moved." Then she closed it and lay back on the couch and let the gentle ache of an honest day carry her under the quiet waves of sleep, while outside the tower held steady against the night, and the river kept its slow, strong song. Spring crept into the city like a sea. At first, just a softness in the air. then buds along the maple branches outside the apartment windows, then sunlight on the marble of the tower. Amelia noticed it one morning. While packing lunches for the twins, the light was gold instead of gray, and the quiet felt less like waiting for disaster and more like the beginning of a song. She braided Emma's hair, while Emma chattered about birds building houses and trees. Oliver told her about the Code Club, building a robot shaped like a cat. They walked to the tower together, and she watched them run to the children's center and vanish into color and laughter, and it struck her how far they had come. At work, people had stopped whispering her name like a rumor. They spoke it like a fact. She had moved from projects to full campaigns, leading meetings where her voice carried clear across the glass rooms. Her ideas no longer questioned before they were heard. She had learned how to draw stories like maps and thread numbers through them. Like rivers, she had become something people looked toward instead of around. And sometimes she caught herself in a reflection and almost did not know. The woman staring back, the one who stood straight without apology. Nathan had stopped showing up like weather and started showing up like clockwork, at first, just passing by her desk with a question, then lingering at her project boards, then staying late and asking about her notes, her children, her thoughts about markets and futures and science. They began having dinner together in the office after the floors emptied, sitting on the carpet with takeout containers and city lights bleeding across the glass. They talked about launches and user retention, and why thunder sounds closer over water, and whether people are more like bridges or like rivers. Sometimes they worked without speaking. Sometimes they just sat while the world outside kept spinning, and for those hours it felt like the noise could not find them. One night after a launch that broke every record, they stood on the balcony above the sleeping city, the wind warm and full of distant. Nathan said, "You were never supposed to be a symbol," and she said, "I know." He said, "You were supposed to be a person and you fought your way back to that." She said, "I am still learning how," and he said, "Keep learning, but do not forget to live." After that, they started leaving the tower, sometimes driving the twins to the park on Saturdays, or stopping at the ramen shop with the blue awning, where Oliver always spilled broth, and Emma always made the chef laugh. Nathan never announced these visits. He simply appeared at the apartment door on weekend mornings, holding a bag of oranges or books about space. The twins began to accept him the way children accept weather, as something that just arrives and Amelia noticed the small changes first. Nathan laughed more quietly, but more often he listened longer. He stopped checking his watch. During conversations, he brought her coffee without asking how she took it. He stood behind her during presentations and said nothing, but she could feel his presence like a warm current steadying her spine one night while reviewing campaign. He paused mid-sentence and said, "You make this place feel alive," and then went back to editing as if he had not said. The press stopped circling when they realized there was no collapse. The headlines shifted from suspicion to fascination. Articles called her the architect of the turnaround, the woman who rebuilt herself and the company. At the same time, people sent letters asking how she did it, and she never knew how to answer, except to say, slowly, with fear in my mouth and fire in my hand. By summer, she had taken over an entire floor for her division, her name etched in silver on the glass. She spent her days mapping the next 5 years of the brand, and her evenings walking home with the twins through warm twilight. They filled the apartment with paper stars and cardboards. Oliver's rockets grew taller. Emma's painted skies became full of birds and color and motion. They laughed loud, they slept heavy. She sometimes stood in the doorway at night and thought, "This is what safe sounds like." Then came the night of the global. The tower transformed again into a cathedral of light delegates from across the world gathered under the vaulted glass. She stood backstage in a navy suit, her hair twisted into a braid like armor. Nathan stood beside her, adjusting his cuff. His voice calm and low. The first time I spoke here, I thought I would break in half. She said, I feel like glass. He said glass bends before it. Remember that? She walked on stage to a wave of quiet and told the story not of the company, but of time. How they had decided to build time and give it back to people in minutes and hours and moments they thought were lost. She spoke of Oliver and Emma without naming them, only saying two small reasons. She spoke of failing and rising again, her voice steady, like water cutting stone. And when she finished, the room rose to its feet, and the applause sounded like the start of a storm. After the cameras and the questions and the handshakes, she slipped away to the service balcony where the air smelled like warm metal, and Nathan was already there, leaning on the railing, watching the river lights below. He said, "You stopped the world for a minute." She said, "I think it stopped me instead." He looked at her, and for the first time, there was no distance in his eyes. No walls, only something open and He said, "I used to think survival was the point now. I think it is just the beginning." They stood close enough that the wind tangled their hair. She said quietly, "What comes after survival?" He said, "Living." And for a long moment, they just stood there, with the city humming below them, and the river keeping its slow song. Later, when she returned to the apartment, the twins were asleep. Oliver curled around a book, Emma clutching her son. She tucked the blankets around them and stood in the doorway a long while listening to their breathing. Steady and sure, she walked to the window and looked at the tower, burning against the night. Her reflection faint over the glass. She whispered to her, "We are not symbols. We are home." The next morning, Nathan appeared at her office door with coffee and said, "Come see." He led her up the private stair to the very top, where the air was sharp and clean, and the city unrolled in every direction, sunlight flashing on the river. The floor was empty, except for a long table and 2 chairs. He said, "This will be yours if you want it. The new strategy wing lead it. Build it, name it." She said, "Why me?" He said, "Because you walked into the wrong room and changed." She looked at the city, at the thin silver line where water met sky, and said, "Yeah." That night, she wrote her name on the door, and when she left the building with Oliver holding one hand and Emma the other, Nathan stood at the curb and watched them go. Not like a man guarding something fragile, but like someone watching something finally. As they walked home through the soft summer dusk, Emma asked, "Is tomorrow going to be like today?" And Amelia squeezed her hand and said, "No, tomorrow will be bigger." And Oliver asked bigger how, and she said bigger, like the sky and the street filled with their laughter, echoing up the towers. At bedtime, she tucked them into their warm beds and stood at the window, looking out at the sky, her badge on her laptop, her phone silent, and she thought of the night she had walked into the family center with the folder in her shaking hands, and she thought of the man who had said, "Stop," and rewritten her. She whispered, "Thank you," and then she turned off the lamp and let the dark come. For the first time, she did not fear the dark, because she knew what waited on the other side of it.